Bible study, and particularly at this time, we're in the book of Job. And we're at this point where we're looking at Job and the struggles that he is going through in regards to facing losing everything, including his health. And how do you deal with things like that? Then it's particularly more difficult for Job than it is for us. And the reason for that being is Job didn't have a Bible. No Bible. His book that we're doing right now is the first book of the Bible. And the bulk of the Bible wasn't completed until, Christ came. That's how all that came down. And he didn't have the knowledge that you and I have. We are so far advanced with biblical knowledge that Job, he just didn't have that. And as a result of that, he struggled with all of this because his source of knowledge about God we're going to be looking at. And we started last time that we met looking at that source of knowledge that he had. And to just bring you up to speed on that, he lived about 400, maybe 500 years after the Noahic flood. And Israel as a nation didn't exist for another 200, 300, 400 years perhaps before there's an Abraham. And so you have a situation here where the only knowledge he has is what came through Noah, because only 8 people survived from the antediluvian world. God, on occasions, actually spoke to people in the antediluvian world, but not wholesale as we would think that we would need. And their knowledge was very, very limited the further they got away from the Garden of Eden. And that was about, anywhere between 1,500 and 2,500 years that the antediluvian world existed before the flood. And the evil in the world was so great, and the violence in the world was so much, that God decided to shut it down completely. And only Noah and his family, his wife, their 3 sons, and their sons' wives, a total of 8 people, got on the ark and were therefore preserved. And after a little more than a year before they could get off the ark, and it came to rest on the mountain range of Ararat. And they come off, the world is totally different than what they knew. What knowledge they had about God was contained primarily in Noah, his wife, and their 3 children and their wives. And it's very limited knowledge, because it's what they remembered, what they heard, or what they learned, or what was repeated over and over again to them that they knew. But as far as having a Bible, didn't exist. Didn't exist at all. And what we are going to be looking at over the next few slides is the feelings and the experience. And you look at it and say, why doesn't he grow up and be a real mature person about this? Well, he is about as mature as you could get spiritually, which was not very much in those days. So we have to give him a break on a lot of the things that he did and said. he kind of blamed God a little bit. Why is God doing this to me? I don't deserve this. And of course, that was picked up by the general feeling of the day and time of Job, that good people, godly people, he blesses. Sinful people, all kinds of problems come into their lives, like Job was experiencing. And so their immediate assumption was, Job is a hideous sinner, regardless of what God said. And so he feels abandoned. Don't know why this is happening. They're saying I've got to confess my sin, but I honestly don't know what to confess. And at the same time, he realizes that he is not perfect. And of course, God never said he was perfect. He said he was the most righteous man in the East. And he said that on 2 occasions, God did. So we're talking about a man that is ethically, relationship-wise with God. He is the example before others on how to live. But he can't explain and he can't rationalize what's happened to him. But of course, you and I, having the Bible now and reading this and reading the introduction of Job, we understand. Later on, Job does understand, at least somewhat. But we got to give him a break. And we got to count our blessings that God has given us a Bible that answers every basic, fundamental question of need, survival, and salvation in that book. It tells us how it all began. It tells us when sin came into the world. It tells us how it came in. It told us what happened to the antediluvian world. It told us the world that you and I live in. What's going to happen to this world that we live in? It's going to be destroyed. We know all the facts. And as we look around in our society and our culture today, and we see the spiritual level like this, going like this, we know that we're somewhere at that point we will cross God's deadline. The church will be raptured. 7 years of tribulation will follow. And here comes Jesus with his church, to whom he is married for the last 7 years in heaven, back with him, and he's going to establish his kingdom. And it's going to be like it is in heaven. His will be done on earth. And all the sin that's going on in the world will not be tolerated. And those who insist on those sinful practices, they're going to die. He just takes their life, takes them away, they're gone. Very quickly, everybody else learns, we're not going to be able to get away with that. That there will be any number of people that are born, raised, grow up, that will not receive the Lord. They will submit because they don't want to die. And the Bible tells us all about that. It tells us what the eternal state's going to be. It tells us about the end of this world, the end of the universe, this present world. It tells us what will follow. It tells us about the judgment. It warns us about hell. It tells us all about that. We got everything that Job did not have. And how tragic it is that people don't want to read the Bible. They don't want to study the Bible. They don't want to learn the Bible. They just simply want to do their thing and let God do his thing. And that's not what God has intended. Remember, he is our creator. There's an obligation of the creation to its creator. We have to realize, recognize, and understand that we must need to pay attention to what God says. And that, his position is not up for us to say, well, I think this or I think that. It's to accept what he has given to us. And that's where blessing and promise really comes. Now, having said all that, we're going to pick up here at verse 6, where we left off with verse 5. Again, from here on for the next few slides, he is writing an answer to Bildad. This extensive memorandum. He is writing this. He is doing this to challenge everybody and try to get them to understand the difficulty he's going through, which they don't seem to want to understand. They seem to, quote unquote, think they know all the answers, and they don't. All right, verse 6. Which shaketh the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof. Now, just to refresh our memory, back to verse 5. Which removed the mountains, and they know not, which overturned them in his anger. Now, you can sit there and say, I don't have any idea what that means, and who's it talking about? Well, this is part of the thing that with Job, you remember, he doesn't have our knowledge and understanding of God as he writes this. He doesn't have that. He does not have that. Okay. The which here, you could say the Lord which removed the mountains, and they know not which overturned them in his anger. What is that all about, and what is Job talking about? He is now setting forth what he knows about the antediluvian world and its destruction. So he's talking about that antediluvian world. The Lord is the one who moved the mountains. He broke up the crust of the earth. Everything was shifted and jumbled around. The fountains of the deep were broken up, and it poured on them. The rain did. For 40 days and 40 nights, 24/7. Wow. Now, notice this. Which, in verse 6, where we pick up today, which shaketh the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof trembling. Now, he's talking about the breaking down of the crust of the earth. And, if you go to the mountains of West Virginia and drive through some of the back roads and get to look at some of the mountains and the jaggedness of some of those mountains, and you can see the various levels of soil. And you see over here another mountain, and it's got the same levels of soil, but they're broken up and spread apart. It's very easy to imagine the time that they were all one, but now they were broken up. And some sink very low, others were pushed up high. the crust of the earth. And the center of the earth was pocketed with great volumes of water, in which this was in part what helped water the surface of the earth without rain. It's a terrarium-like experience. You have the atmosphere, and above that you have the water that fell for 40 days and 40 nights above that. That filtered out all of the sun's harmful rays. That made the earth a terrarium, so that from pole to pole, from north to south, and everything in between, the temperature was probably somewhere around a 72 to 74 degree temperature year-round. And at night, as the sun went down in parts of the earth, as it rotated and so on, you would have the dampness and the dew that would rise up. And all of this was a part of the cycling of the moisture that was in the atmosphere, even as we breathe. The atmosphere had normal humidity in it, which was the best possible for your breathing. And so all that was broken up. And we have never seen torrential rains like it did for the 40 days and 40 nights. But that's what he's discussing here. The earth has been shaken, broken up, is how he describes it. And out of her place, meaning out of where it was created when God created the earth. It was in a perfect state of creation. Now it's all broken up. Everything has gone haywire because God pulled the plug on them. And those who were on the ark were saved. The animals that were on the ark were saved. All air-breathing animals perished that were not on the ark. All humans perished who were not on the ark. The entire globe, there was not a piece of ground anywhere that stuck above the water. Everything was below. Where we get our natural gas, where we get petroleum products, are the result of the death of animals and people. And they were oftentimes, because of the things breaking up and all like this in directions, they would be, their carcasses, their bodies would be swept in and compacted in different valleys and so on, down deep. And that, over the period of time, from then until, well, the latter part of the 19th century, when we started looking for something to fuel our fireplaces in the home and to fuel our vehicles as we came into the 20th century, stuff like that. That's where these products came from. They are refined and used, but that's what you have left of the antediluvian world, the dead corpses of the people who died in the flood and all the animals who died in the flood. And remember, there weren't great oceans on the world at that time. Today, 71.6% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, either liquefied or frozen. That leaves you about 28.4 or so percent that is land not entirely inhabitable. It's tough living in Antarctica. North Pole doesn't even have any land under it. It's all ice. So there's areas that are not very good for people to live in. And today we have 8 billion people plus living on planet Earth. And that's why things are so crowded in many places, because of that. As such, now, the shaking that went on, we're talking about earthquakes, the breaking up, and we still have earthquakes today. And that's why you have fault lines and earthquakes. And there is what is called the Ring of Fire that starts basically in Mexico, goes up the west coast of America and Canada, around Alaska, and over and back down from Russia and the countries below there. And this is a great fault line. And people who work with this sort of thing say it's potential that at any point in time a massive earthquake can occur, and these two things will shift dramatically. How much is anybody's guess? But could it shift so much that the west coast of the United States would be underwater all the way back to Las Vegas, is the calculation today. That will be the new beachfront to go to. But that's something that may or may not happen. But every now and again you get rumblings of earthquakes, 0.6, 0.7, and things like this. And buildings shake, and then everything falls, crack opens up in the ground, and so on. And that is done periodically in all parts of the world from time to time, down through the years that has happened. So, he knows about these things, the flood, and what caused that. In verse 7, which God, which commandeth the sun, and it riseth not, and sealeth up the stars. Again, he's talking about the time of the flood, the antediluvian world, the worldwide flood that went on there. Now, what does he mean about he commands the sun not to rise? Well, by the fact that he commanded the earth to stand still. So the sun's not going to rise. The earth is what does the moving. And the sun's not going to rise. But the water canopy that's over the earth in the antediluvian world, which protected us from all the negative rays of the sun, light came through. And you could see, since they had no storms, every day was a clear day. At night, you could see stars through the water. Though you didn't know that that was water. You could just see the stars, but you could see them. And then when that collapsed and began to fall upon the earth, it took 40 days and 40 nights to get all that out of the atmosphere. Today, it's impossible to have a worldwide flood like that again, because we don't have that much moisture in the air today. We get enough moisture from here and there, like in Hawaii right now, with all the oceans that surrounds the islands of Hawaii, and they're getting torrential rains. But nothing like what the torrential rains were like in the flood of Noah's day. Nothing like that at all. But it's torrential rains to us. But that filtered out. And it muted the light so that it was spread out more than just targeted in the area. Again, no clouds in the atmosphere. And as such, you could see stars. And the sun, you could see it come up and go, though not as bright and certainly not harmful to the eyes as it is today. You could see it. So what happened? when all this came down, the earth stopped its rotation. And therefore the sun didn't rise or set. Then you have this huge volume of water coming that totally surrounds the earth, coming drawn in by the gravity pull of the earth and sucked right in. And it's just coming down torrentially like never before. And everything was breaking up. And the waters that was in the caverns and the grounds was coming up and bubbling up. And it was quite a mess. And that's what he's talking about, because he's heard through Noah and his family things that went on and the things that they experienced. And that was passed down. So he has some idea of understanding of this, but that's all. And that's what he's talking about here. Yeah. The sun became invisible for a period of time. They were still shining, but it wasn't getting through. And you know what it's like when you have dark clouds that are heavily water-filled. In the middle of the day, it can get like dark as night virtually. And heavy rains can come even today, but they don't last that long because we don't have that much water in the atmosphere. But it gives you a small picture of what this is all about. And he seals the stars, meaning that the stars that they used to see, they couldn't see them anymore. The people couldn't see them anymore. And he knows about this. Verse 8, which alone spreadeth out the heavens, the universe, and treadeth upon the waves of the earth. Now, what's he talking about here? Well, again, God. God, which alone by himself spreadeth out the universe, meaning now instead of saying before the flood, just certain parts of the universe through the water canopy, instead of just seeing those, they now see it spread out. So Noah and his family, when they look out at night, great day. Where did all those stars come from? Well, that's in part what happened here. Spreading out of the universe. And treadeth speaks of his walking, God walking upon the waves of the sea. There was virtually no seas before the collapse of the antediluvian world. He's talking about God walking on the flood waters around the earth. It is a picture that was passed down from Noah's generation, that though all this happened, God was still in charge. And figuratively speaking, he was walking on the water. Let's see now. 2,000 years ago, God did that again. Jesus walked on the Sea of Galilee. Yeah. So it all points out the fact that Jesus really is God too when we look at it that way. All right. Verse 9. God which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south. What in the world is all that? Well, you probably guessed that this right here are constellations of stars. This constellation makes up a bear. Not sure what constellation this makes up. Pleiades. This is an interesting one. The stories that come down from Noah down to the day of Job, and even reaching down into the early days of the early church. Stories about this. Pleiades, originally, you could only see with the naked eye because they didn't have telescopes in those days in the antediluvian world. They had perfect vision, but they didn't have telescopes. You could see that Pleiades was made up of 6 stars. Then on occasion, there would be 7 stars. And then they would be gone. Just the 6 would remain. And so it was thought by the people of that day and time that the Pleiades, because this is plural, referring to its multi-starred, was only made up of 6 or 7 stars, depending on how things worked in the universe. Today, with our powerful telescopes that we've developed, Pleiades, we now know, was made up of hundreds of stars. But you could only see 6 with the naked eye. On occasions, the 7th. But with our telescopes, we can see that it's a much bigger, much more expansive than the older generation ever realized. Again, the chambers of the south refer to these 3 constellations here being in the southern hemisphere. That's what we call it. In those days, they were calling it chambers of the south, where the stars were kept in chambers in the south, or other places too. All right, 10. Which doeth great things. God, which doeth great things, past finding out what those great things are, yes, and wonders without number. This is Job's understanding of God. Yeah. He's done a lot of great things. We don't know what all he did. Again, only what came through Noah did we know until we got the rest of the Bible. All right? They were past finding out what these great things were, and wonders without number, miracles, things of highly unusual character. Well, our time is gone.